Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Boss Economics World, the only place where we rip the mask off government incompetence and expose the economic dumpster fires they keep starting. Tonight, we've got a doozy of a story, folks, a shiny new tax straight from the geniuses in Washington that's threatening to tank the dollar, scare off foreign investors, and turn the US Treasury market into a ghost town. Oh, and guess what? It's all because our beloved leaders can't stop playing economic whack-a-mole with their half-baked policies. Buckle up, because we're diving into the chaos, and trust me, you're gonna need a stiff drink by the end of this. So, here's the deal, folks. Last week, the US House of Representatives, those paragons of fiscal responsibility, passed a sweeping tax and spending bill that includes a little gem buried in Section 899. What's the gem, you ask? A progressive tax of up to 20% on foreign investors' passive income, dividends, royalties, you name it. That's right, if you're a foreign investor parking your hard-earned cash in the US, Uncle Sam's got his hand out, ready to snatch a fifth of your returns. And who's on the chopping block? Oh, just investors from countries the US deems unfair in their tax practices. According to the suits at law firm Davis Polk, we're talking heavyweights like the European Union, the UK, India, Brazil, Australia, basically anyone who's ever dared to disagree with Washington's economic playbook. Now, the Congressional Budget Office says this little tax could rake in $116 billion over 10 years. Sounds great, right? Free money. Except, here's the kicker, folks, Wall Street analysts are screaming from the rooftops that this could kneecap demand for US Treasuries and send the dollar into a tailspin. And why does that matter to you, the average Joe or Jane watching at home? Because when Treasuries tank and the dollar weakens, your grocery bills go up, your mortgage rates spike, and your retirement savings start looking like pocket lint. But hey, at least the government's got its $116 billion, right? Priorities, people. Let's break this down, shall we? First, let's talk about US Treasuries, those magical IOUs the government issues to fund its reckless spending sprees. For years, foreign investors, especially from places like Europe and Asia, have been gobbling up treasuries like they're hotcakes at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Why? Because the US has been seen as the safest bet in town, the golden child of financial markets, the so-called US exceptionalism. But here's the problem, folks, that golden child is starting to look more like the problem child. With fiscal deficits ballooning, $36 trillion in national debt as of mid-2025, according to the US Treasury Department, and a new trade policy built on tariffs that would make a protectionist blush, global investors are already side-eyeing the US. And now, Congress wants to slap a 20% tax on their passive income? Gee, I wonder why they might start shopping for safer bets elsewhere. Oh, and don't take my word for it. George Saravilos, head of FX research at Deutsche Bank, put it perfectly in a note last Thursday, this legislation could turn a trade war into a capital war. That's right, folks, a capital war. Picture this, foreign investors fleeing US markets, dumping treasuries, and leaving the US government scrambling to find buyers for its mountain of debt. And when demand for treasuries drops, what happens? Interest rates go up, borrowing costs skyrocket, and suddenly, the government's grand plan to fund its spending addiction starts looking like a Ponzi scheme on life support. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about the dollar, shall we? Morgan Stanley, those nerds who actually do the math, warned that this new tax could weaken the dollar by reducing foreign appetite for US assets. And who's getting hit the hardest? European investors, who, according to Morgan Stanley's strategist Michael Zizas, are particularly vulnerable. Now, let's put this in perspective. As of 2024, foreign investors held $8.1 trillion in US Treasuries, with Europe accounting for a hefty chunk, about $3.5 trillion, per the US Treasury's latest data. That's trillion with a T, folks. And now, Congress wants to give them a big, fat middle finger with a 20% tax. Brilliant. Just brilliant. And here's why this matters to you, the everyday viewer. A weaker dollar means everything you buy from abroad, your iPhones, your cars, your cheap fast fashion clothes, gets more expensive. Inflation, anyone? Oh, and let's not forget the Federal Reserve, which is already juggling interest rates like a clown at a circus. According to the Fed's latest minutes from May 2025, they're already worried about inflationary pressures, with the Consumer Price Index, CPI, ticking up to 4.2% year-over-year, well above their 2% target. And now, Congress is handing them another grenade to juggle. Thanks, guys. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because this tax isn't just a standalone disaster, it's a symptom of a much deeper disease. Let's talk about the government's economic management, or should I say, mismanagement. For years, we've watched Washington stumble from one self-inflicted crisis to another. Remember the tariff wars of the late 2010s and early 2020s? Those brilliant ideas that jacked up costs for American consumers and tanked global trade? Well, fast forward to 2025, and we've got a new administration doubling down on protectionism, slapping tariffs left and right, and now adding a tax on foreign investors to the mix. It's like watching a toddler play with matches in a room full of dynamite. And let's not forget the fiscal mess. The U.S. budget deficit hit $3.1 trillion in fiscal year 2024, according to the Congressional Budget Office, and it's on track to hit $3.5 trillion in 2025. Why? Because Congress can't stop spending money it doesn't have. Infrastructure bills, social programs, defense budgets, sure, some of it's necessary, but when you're borrowing 30 cents of every dollar you spend, maybe it's time to rethink your priorities. And instead of cutting spending or raising taxes on, say, the ultra-wealthy, who, by the way, hold $50 trillion in wealth, per Oxfam's 2025 report, Congress decides to go after foreign investors. Because nothing says economic leadership like alienating the very people who fund your debt. Now, let's give credit where credit's due. The White House, in its infinite wisdom, hasn't commented on the impact of this new tax. Shocker. I mean, why would they? It's not like their policies are driving the economy off a cliff or anything. And hey, maybe they're too busy planning their next brilliant idea, like taxing the air we breathe to fund their next pet project. But here's the thing, folks, this isn't just about one bad tax. It's about a government that's lost the plot, a government that's more interested in scoring political points than solving real problems. And the result? A looming economic recession that could make the 2008 financial crisis look like a walk in the park. Let's look at the data, shall we? The IMF's latest World Economic Outlook, released in April 2025, downgraded its U.S. growth forecast to 1.8% for 2026, citing policy uncertainty and fiscal imbalances. Meanwhile, the Conference Board's leading economic index has been flashing red for 6 months straight, signaling a high risk of recession. And now, Congress is throwing this tax into the mix, threatening to scare off foreign capital at a time when the U.S. needs it most. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire and then wondering why your house burned down. So, what's the takeaway, folks? This tax isn't just a bad idea, it's a catastrophic idea, brought to you by the same geniuses who've been driving the U.S. economy into the ground for years. It's a perfect example of how government mismanagement can turn a manageable problem into a full-blown crisis. And who pays the price? You do, the taxpayer, the worker, the saver, the investor. Not the politicians. Not the bureaucrats. You. But hey, don't worry, Washington's got it all under control. Just like they did during the dot-com bubble, the housing crash, and every other disaster they've sleepwalked into. So, grab your popcorn, folks, because the economic roller coaster's about to take another wild turn. And as always, here at Boss Economics World, we'll be right here, calling out the clowns in charge and shining a light on the chaos they create. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and for heaven's sake, don't trust these jokers with your money.